Rishi Sunak breached the code of conduct over his failure to declare his wife's investments, but he won't be sanctioned. A parliamentary investigation was launched into his billionaire wife's shares in a childcare company that then benefited from his March budget. But the Common Standards Committee found that it was a minor and inadvertent breach. Joining me now to discuss this, TalkTV's international editor, Isabel Oakeshott. Hello, Isabel. Good to have you on the programme. This is somewhat confusing because it is a breach and yet there will be no sanctions. Do you agree that it's minor and inadvertent?
Well, I do agree that it was probably inadvertent, and as such, it's minor. I mean, it's not as if the Sunaks made huge sums of money as a result of some kind of deception here. But I think the bigger picture is just the sheer complexity of the Prime Minister and his wife's financial affairs. It's important to remember just how wealthy they are. His wife, Oakeshott Murthy, is the daughter of a very, very successful self-made billionaire couple in India. All credit to them. They have an amazing business, amazing global business, the Murthy family, that they built themselves. And in fact, her Rishi Sunak's mother-in-law was very involved in building the business from scratch. And the Sunaks, therefore, have a lot of money. And Rishi Sunak himself was pretty wealthy even before he became married to her. You know, he began building a very successful business career. So those complex financial arrangements and all sorts of investments, I looked into it when I was helping write a biography of Rishi Sunak, do occasionally land a cabinet minister, never mind a prime minister, into a bit of trouble just because there's so much money sloshing around in different places. But in terms of how serious this is, to me, it's nothing like the still extraordinary breach that he was guilty of. And it's not a technical breach, it's just a kind of breach of all norms when he, as Chancellor, allowed his wife to continue having so-called non-dom status. I mean, that is an absolutely gargantuan political blunder, which really should have finished him, and extraordinary that it didn't.
And why do you think it didn't? Why didn't it?
I mean, this, in all my years of being a political journalist, a couple of decades, no other chancellor could have got away with this. And it's not because Rishi Sunak is tremendously popular. I think he was just an absolute beneficiary of circumstance. I mean, it very nearly did finish him. He did end up diving politically in terms of his popularity. And at one point, it looked as if his career was over. And he just ended up being a beneficiary of all the things that brought Boris Johnson down. And we know that he was never the party's first choice as the successor to Boris Johnson anyway. That was Liz Truss. So I think this is a minor one. It will float by. It's barely even a rap on the knuckles, this one.
Do we know how much money Rishi Sunak's wife made as a result of the budgetary amendment that led to the company that she had shares in making some extra profit? What kinds of amounts of money are we talking about? Would it be life-changing for ordinary people but almost negligible, infinitesimal to the Sunaks, or was it really quite a lot of money?
Actually, Vanessa, I don't know the answer to that question, so I'm not going to pretend I do, but I don't think we're not talking millions here or even hundreds of thousands to the best of my knowledge. I imagine it's quite minor. I mean, what politicians in very senior positions normally do when they become, when they get into the cabinet is that they put all their assets into so-called blind trusts. So they simply cannot be perceived to have done anything in their roles as cabinet ministers that they might actually benefit from personally. So someone else manages their resources, and chooses what companies to back and invest in. But the Sunaks have so many different vehicles going on, and they're across many different jurisdictions. And I'm not saying they've done anything wrong about that, but it's not like you or I managing our finances. This is a bit of a complicated picture.
Do you think it's just as important when you said we really should talk about the amount of money they have, just to set the context of all of this, also to say that Rishi Sunak doesn't come from a wealthy family, that his family just worked in the NHS. He wasn't somebody born with a silver-plated even spoon in his mouth, was he?
No, he certainly wasn't. But that said, they were decently well off. They were solidly middle class. They did come to the UK with not very much, and built careers in the health sector. And they worked very hard, and they instilled in their children a very, very strong work ethic. But Rishi Sunak did go to private schools. He went to a prep school, a very nice one. He then went to Winchester College. And that was not on the basis of scholarships. His parents were able to afford school fees, but this was in a day when paying school fees did not require you to be a kind of a Russian oligarch or some extraordinarily wealthy banker or hedge fund person. School fees several decades ago, it was possible for good, hard-working people like Rishi Sunak's parents to just about scrape together enough to send a child to private schools. And they were very ambitious for their children. And Rishi Sunak was nothing if not a grafter at school.
I suppose the reason I say it is so that we don't give a misleading impression that he comes from astronomical, stellar, celestial wealth as his wife does. He doesn't, does he? He comes from an ordinary grafting family, and he's made a lot of money himself, and it's not kind of fair or just to paint a picture of him coming from a privileged, kind of etiolated, rarefied background, because he didn't, did he?
That's absolutely right. He didn't. As I say, he came from a good, hard-working, professional background, and they all deserve the success they have, in my view. And nor would it be fair to suggest that this breach of parliamentary standards, which was a technical thing, by the way, it's all about actually, rather than forgetting to put the thing on the record in itself, much of the focus from the report is actually on criticising him for sort of allowing his spokesman to brief the press about it before telling the parliamentary commissioner. It's all very boring and down in the weeds.
Let's talk about something else, Isabel, pertaining to Rishi Sunak today, and that is that he's rejected claims. These are claims made in The Guardian today, that he blocked plans to rebuild 5 hospitals riddled with that particular concrete Raac that, crumbles and turns into a kind of chocolate aero and then disintegrates. And this is that when he was a chancellor, he denied funding to rebuild public buildings hit by Raac. This was in 2020, and apparently he's rejected those claims. Do you know any more about that story?
Well, actually, I think this is a much more interesting story and much more important. And what I can tell you is something I know from the WhatsApp files, from the lockdown files. And that is that as Chancellor, Rishi Sunak repeatedly blocked the plans, or blocked or thwarted or delayed the very high-profile pledge that the Conservatives had made in their manifesto in 2019 to build 40 hospitals. Now, some of our viewers and listeners may remember that being a kind of centrepiece of the Tory manifesto. We're going to build 40 new hospitals. But they didn't actually mean it. They never had the resources to do that. It had never been signed off by Rishi Sunak in the Treasury. And time and again, those WhatsApps that I've seen, people may remember the 2.3 million words of WhatsApps contain a lot about the hospital building programme and the state of hospitals generally, and expose the despair in the Department of Health at the inability really to get this programme going. And I would imagine, although I haven't tried to match up which hospitals really needed urgently rebuilding because of the concrete with what was being said in the WhatsApp's message, but it is certainly true that the Treasury was none too keen on the hospital rebuilding programme and did not set the money aside for it.